Okay, hello again. This is going to be Chapter 7, Emerging and Early Adulthood, generally looking at the time of past adolescence and into early adulthood years. Traditionally, we think of this time frame as 18 to 25, but we'll get into why it could potentially go up to even 30. So, emerging adulthood defined. So, again, 18 to 25, sometimes up to 29. People are mostly independent at this point in their life, but really there's some exceptions, especially that 18 to 21-year-old range, if the person has chosen to go to college. So, mostly independent, but how do we define independence? So if we were in class right now, I'd ask you to brainstorm with me on the board, how do you define independence? And some of you might say, I have a job, I can pay my own bills, I don't have to rely on my parents for their Netflix account anymore, things like that. So it's when you're mostly independent and you've explored your identity and you're starting to solidify some of those pieces. But your job, you're probably still going to have 2, 3, 4 jobs in between this time period. Relationships are kind of unsteady. You might have a couple different relationships. Some might be serious, some might be just fun, etc. You also move a lot. You will move your house, your belongings, your things a lot during this period. You tend to be self-focused, but that doesn't mean you're self-centered. And the difference there is that self-centered people think the world revolves around them. Self-focused people are doing more things that are related to self-care. So things about, I need to improve my professional development. I need to pick up this new skill set. I'm going to take this class on that skill set. Or I really want to focus on taking care of my mental health, so I'm going to join this gym. So that's the difference between self-focused and self-centered. Tend to feel still a little bit on the in-between side. Tend to feel a little bit more like not quite sure I fit in with my college kind of life, but I'm not really sure I'm an adult yet. Kind of this weird, what you guys were working on in the group discussion is for next week is quarter life crisis. You know, what is this quarter life crisis? It's this weird in-between feeling. The best part about the stage, though, is that you are full of possibilities. So this is one of the reasons I love teaching young adults, is because the world is still very open to you. You're still full of opportunities. You haven't settled down yet. You haven't had things put in place where you're sort of stuck, so to say. And you still think that the world is a great, wonderful, exciting place to be a part of. So that's the benefit of being in this stage of life. Okay, living arrangements. So people in this stage of life typically live, depending on their gender, in different places. Now, this is based on research. Lots of people like to argue with me on this slide because they're like, well, that's not true for me. Okay, that's fine, but you're a N of 1, so let's keep that all in mind. So men tend to live with their parents more often than women, and women are more likely to be sort of head of household at this point in their life, meaning they make more money, they're more stable with their job, etc. So why does that happen? We're going to talk a little bit later about marriage and why marriage is sort of happening later in life. And men at this stage of the game tend to be a little bit on the unemployed or underemployed side, meaning that they have a college degree, but they're working at a job that might not require a college degree. Recession will increase college enrollments, but students will live at home to save money. So we notice that all the time. All points are pointing to there's going to be a recession given this pandemic, and so while enrollment will increase at Carthage, people will live at home, which is smart in a recession kind of economy. After college, most people are more likely to live on their own. Eventually, if they've gone to college, they are most likely to live on their own eventually. It takes time, though, to get from, I need to graduate college, find a job, and wherever that job is likely where I'm going to end up living. So sometimes that can be 6 months to even a year. People say, I got to figure out what my student loan payments are going to look like, so I'm going to live at home to try to figure things out financially before I go out and get my own apartment. So either way, it eventually happens so that people go to college live on their own. Okay. This is the slide I get to tell you that enjoy your physical life right now. You're in the best physical performance period of your life. By the time we hit the next stage of the game, everything's going to decrease. So just enjoy all these great things you have right now, because it just goes downhill from here. Okay. Obesity. We start to see an increase in adult obesity at this stage of life. Typically, people in their 20s and early 30s will gain about 1 to 2 pounds per year. You can see on the right all the causes of why people gain weight. all things that you know, all things that you've heard about. There's not really one single thing that we can point to say it's because of the environment or it's because of your genetics. It's all of those things over on the side. It can be due to medication or other medication. When I was in my early 30s, early 20s, I'm sorry, I started taking Levoxyl for my thyroid disorder. Nobody ever told me I was supposed to eat it on an empty stomach. Medicine didn't work. Pharmacist wasn't being clear with me about what I needed to do. Those kinds of things can happen. I went off Levoxyl when I lost my health insurance. So for 8 months, I had no health insurance, no medicine, gained 80 pounds in 8 months' time. It's a lot of weight to gain in a short period of time because of all these things, right? So it wasn't just my genetics of my thyroid disorder, it was also the medication or the lack thereof, and my environment situation. I didn't have a job. So all of those things combined can lead to obesity. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. Okay, moving on. There's some, of course, consequences of obesity, etc. Alcohol in early adulthood, this is all common sense things. So binge drinking, of course, leads to all sorts of problems, as you can see right there. Early adulthood drinking, more college students, so more people who go away to college, drink and non-college students drink. And we're really talking about residential college students, not necessarily community college or commuter students. Why people drink, you can see all the reasons there. You guys know it's available. It's unstructured time. It's here. It's fun. People feel good about themselves when they're drinking. All of these things. So the point here, the bottom line though, is that commuter students who typically live with their family members or any like that, typically are not as likely to be drinking alcohol, mostly because they're in a different schedule of life in terms of having to be home at a certain hour, or maybe they're expected and they're not spending the night in the dorms. So that happens there. Well, and there's an appearance by my cat. Okay. Other things related to drinking and drugs. We know that anti-anxiety, opioid pain relievers, ADHD meds are the largest group to abuse drugs. And we see here 60% of college and 12% of non-college students smoke marijuana daily. I meant to say 6% and 12%. I'm not sure if that's what came out of my mouth. Anyway, that's the ones that are smoking marijuana. Do I think that's higher? Oh, yeah. Especially with the legalization of marijuana in Illinois and likely to be other states around the country, that will definitely increase. But we definitely see more and more marijuana than that. Okay, let's talk about some terms here. So these are on the test and they are matching terms. So just understanding what these terms are, what you need to know for this part. So for gender, sex is your primary and secondary physical characteristic. People who have babies have these gender reveal parties. In all reality, they should be having sex reveal parties. But if you said sex reveal party, that has a whole different connotation linguistically than what gender reveal party is. But specifically speaking, you should be having a sex reveal party because that's what you're looking at on an ultrasound, as you're looking at physical characteristics that are what we're facing. Gender, on the other hand, is something that our society, tells us what a person should act like given their gender. Given their sex. So the sex is assigned female. The gender expectations from society is that girls should be wearing dresses and be pretty and quiet and all that stuff. Gender identity is when the person who is born with a sex assigned female and then agrees with societal norms mentally, they are a girl and that they should wear a dress and they feel comfortable in a dress, etc. Their gender identity then becomes female. Cisgender is when those two match, just like what I just said. And then transgender is someone whose gender identity does not match that sex that was assigned at birth. So the sex is assigned female because there's a vagina at birth. And then the person later on says, I just don't feel comfortable in a dress. I don't feel comfortable acting in the way society expects the gender of a girl to act. I feel like a boy. That's when there's transgender. Speaking of which, see the picture on the left is of Baz Jennings. She's a transgender teen activist. She was actually just accepted to Harvard. I follow her on Instagram. She has a TV show too, I think, and just some children's books, which is sort of interesting. So she was someone who was born assigned the sex of male at birth. Quickly told her parents when she was very, very young, I don't feel like a boy, I think I'm a girl. Her parents were supportive and let her go through this, and she's now become an actress. By the way, that's not her real name. Her first or last name has changed. Okay, so transgender is also known as all of those other things there. It's important to note that gender is not related to sexual orientation. The two are very, very different things. You may remember the gender unicorn we talked about in class. It's hearts and parts, right? So the part is related to your sex and things like that. The heart is more related to your romantic attraction or to what you feel inside. About 700,000 of the US population is considered transgender. The important thing here to note on this slide is that discrimination is rampant among the trans community, especially trans people of color. We've stopped looking at the statistics because it was heartbreaking. Last year, in about April, there had already been somewhere like 25 trans women of color who had been murdered simply because they were transgender. That's disturbing. That's a disturbing statistic to have in the first 4 months of your year. They also get discriminated against in terms of employment. It's very hard to work as a transgender employee if you have not legally changed your name. So you may show up at the job looking like a guy. Your name on your application says Samantha. That can be tricky to work through, right? Things just general harassment in terms of if you have an apartment and someone doesn't agree with who you are and they start harassing you in the hallway or in your apartment building. There's just lots and lots of violence against the trans community. All right, we talked about that before. Sexuality, we're going to talk about this for a quick second. So the sexual response cycle, typically when people have sex, the libido is the sex drive that sort of is the drive behind why we want to have sex. Remember, it's located in your limbic system. That's where your hypothalamus is located in the center part of your brain. So your sexual response cycle goes from excitement, sort of like, I'm really interested, I'm getting excited, to an actual plateau where it's sort of like, yeah, this is good. We're having some good sex here. And then there will be an orgasm, then there's resolution. I'm sorry that this graph is so phallic. I can't help it was in the book. So those are the 4 stages of the sexual response cycle. Some factors that affect the libido, you can see all of them here. There's many, many more. Obviously, if you're not having a good relationship, you're not going to have interest in sex with the person that you're in a relationship with. If you're under stress, if you're tired, back in the 50s, women would always say, I have a headache, honey, not tonight. You know, things like that. It was a real thing. Okay. Like I said, in the hypothalamus, this is where your limbic system is located, remember, in the center part of your brain. And there's all the hormones. Oxytocin is a hormone that's released at orgasm, but it's also released in giving birth and breastfeeding. You may remember a Grey's Anatomy episode where there's a doctor on there who believes that masturbation can lead to orgasm, which would help with the birth process. She's not wrong. Let's put it that way. I think a lot of it's done for TV purposes, and I don't know anyone who's ever tried to orgasm as a way to give birth. But hey, more power to you if you can make that happen in a hospital delivery room. Testosterone, you know, all those other ones there, vasopressin, estrogen, progesterone, etc. We just need, obviously, far more research on women. Sex peaks and declines. Men tend to peak with their sexual interest and their desires and sex life in their late teens, early 20s. Women tend to peak in their 30s and 40s. However, there's been new research out there that said basically women may actually peak earlier, but they're not allowed to in our society. For example, it's okay for men to have a lot of sex partners when they're in their early 20s. They're even applauded for it. They're patted on the back, you know, way to go, son, you know, go get them. Just go have lots of really good fun. As women, if they have more than one boyfriend or more than one girlfriend when they're in their early 20s, they're sort of looked down upon, or it's judged. women in their 30s and 40s, maybe they're post-divorce and they're going out and having a lot of sex, they're applauded. So sometimes what we saw was we would say, oh, well, women just must not peak until their 30s and 40s, and this must be nature's way of making sure we don't overpopulate the earth, because it can't possibly be that men and women peak at the same time, because then we would have too many babies. No. Reality is that we actually may peak at the same time, have societal inhibitions that actually prohibit women from even talking about it. So it's up in the air for now. Because the textbook has it as this, they're going to say that men peak in their late teens, early 20s, and women peak in their 30s and 40s. So there you go. Here's some of the most common sexually transmitted infections. You can see the ones with the asterisks are the ones that are the top 3 largest increase in the world. So we used to hear a lot about HIV. Now that we know how to prevent HIV, it's not as common as it used to be. Excuse me. Okay. All right. On. Sexual orientation. So this is an emotional and sexual attraction to sex or gender. So this is complicated, right? It's not just about, when the LGBT movement was starting to happen, people thought it was all about sex. That gay people wanted to have sex with the same sex, and it was all about sex. When you look at long-standing relationships, straight or gay or whatever else, you'll notice that long-standing relationships, regardless of gender, based mostly on emotional attraction, although it may have started as a sexual attraction. Sexual attraction may be the beginning part. Emotional attraction is that part. So I'll talk about this in a second here. So here's the different types of attraction. There was a man named Alfred Kinsey, and he developed the Kinsey scale. It looks a little bit like this. I think he did a 0 to 10 scale. Basically, he said there's 1% of the population who falls on the end of 0, exclusively straight, no homosexual thoughts, no thoughts or feelings or attractions to anyone of the same gender. And then he said, and there's about 1% of the population that falls on the other end of the continuum. It's exclusively gay, really no attraction whatsoever to the opposite sex. Personally, I tend to fall towards that end of the scale. Recently, Elizabeth has been infatuated with Cole Sprouse. I don't understand the attraction at all. She's always like, isn't he so cute? And I'm like, no, Elizabeth, he's not really that cute. She's like, oh, you're so gay. So there's this, different style of attraction. So pansexual is a little tricky to understand. Pansexual is very similar to bisexual. Bisexual is sort of kind of in the middle, right? Equally attracted to both genders. Pansexual is a different phrase, because if you're attracted to someone who identifies as gender non-binary, meaning they personally don't identify as either male or female, they sort of identify as this unknown or third gender, things like that, that's pansexual. So polysexual is when you're attracted to multiple people and genders and sexes at the same time. So that's where we get polyamory, where people are in polyamorous relationships. And asexual is people who are just not attracted to people at all. I have a student in one of my other classes that has told me, I recently came to the realization that asexual, I have absolutely no attraction to other people. And once I realized that that's who I was and that other people were like that too, I felt better. Now I know that I'm not weird, that I just truly don't want to have any relationships with people because I'm really just not attracted to them. And that's okay too. Demisexual is only attracted after the emotional bond has happened. So this is someone who falls in love with their best friend after being friends with them for 5 years, and then all of a sudden wakes up and realizes, gosh, I'm truly attracted to you. They weren't attracted physically, they were attracted emotionally. Okay. One last story about the emotional versus physical attraction. When I was in college and I was 19, I worked for the Will County Health Department down in Joliet, Illinois. At the time, and probably still today, although it's not as prevalent, the way that people went to the forest preserve on their lunch break, a lot of men would go to the forest preserve and have sex with other men. These men would go into the forest preserve. There was a whole way that they parked their cars in the parking lot, whether it was facing in or whether it was facing out, that had a whole secret underground code to it. Because I was working for the health department, one of my jobs was to go hand out condoms and hand out literature about how to prevent the spread of HIV and AIDS. Well, when I would show up with my little badge at the forest preserve, remember, I was 19 years old. There was no cell phones either, by the way. I'd show up to the forest preserve and I would walk up to men and try to offer them a packet of condoms, like a little Ziploc baggie with condoms and literature about HIV in the health department, how they could get tested. So I would go out and walk around and approach men and ask them if they wanted my packets. All of them denied my packets. Most of them said, well, I know there's other guys here that do stuff like that in the woods. And you could hear them, by the way, in the forest preserve. I was more in the open area by the picnic tables. You could hear men in the forest and in like an outhouse washroom kind of thing, were having sex loudly. And I would walk up to guys and say, hey, why don't you take some condoms? And they would say, no, that's not me. That's not me. They either thought I was a cop. Many of them thought I was a prostitute and asked me out. Or they just didn't know what I was doing, and they would run the opposite way. The thing that bothered me the most about it, when I looked around the parking lot, I noticed at the time a lot of minivans, a lot of station wagons or like hatchbacks that had car seats in them. The men were dressed in suits and ties. These were men who went on their lunch breaks from their business office, had families, who often were spotted wearing what was perceived to be a straight man's wedding ring. And they were going on their lunch break to have sex with men in the forest preserve. And they would get into the car and they would drive back to the office. This was their lunch break. So when you think about this continuum here, these are not men who are exclusively heterosexual, because their behavior was definitely homosexual. Their emotional attraction, they might have emotionally been very much in love with their wives. But maybe they weren't as physically attracted to their wives as they could have been. Or maybe they were just bisexual. They were equally attracted and emotionally invested, as well as physically invested in both genders. But these were men who were definitely having affairs in the forest preserve. Now, in today's day and age, does this still happen in forest preserves? Probably. We also have the dawn of the internet, which makes it a lot easier to hook up on things like Tumblr and, I can't think of the other ones. And Tumblr was not what I wanted to mention. There's other ones, obviously other hookup sites. They're just as good. So does it still happen? Yeah. Does it happen out in the forest preserve quite the same way? Probably not as much. All right. How do we become our sexual orientation? So there are some biological ideas. We do know that identical twins have a concordance rate of about 50%, give or take. If one twin is straight, identical twins, if one twin is straight, the other twin is likely to be straight, even when the twins are separated and raised differently at birth. We also can say the same thing about other orientations as well. We do think that there could be also some evidence to suggest that there's exposure to different hormones while in utero. So some research out there, it's really kind of weak research, that says gay men who are the youngest in their family of a bunch of brothers actually are more likely to be gay than their oldest brother. The theory being that the mom produces less and less testosterone with each pregnancy. And so if a mom has had 5 boys, the youngest boy is more likely to be gay than the oldest boy, because the mom has had less and less testosterone to release into the uterus. I don't know. It's one form of research out there. We really don't have any consensus whatsoever from the research. We just know that some people are this way and some people aren't this way. Okay, this was just a tongue-in-cheek little fun little joke thing. Feel free to read through it. All right, I'm gonna move on past this. Let's talk about your educational investment, which I'm sure you're thinking about right now. So we know that about 80% of college grads are employed overall. We know that college grads do other things in their life, like they feel in control of their life, they're more invested, etc. Typically, people earn more money when they have a higher college degree. They're also less likely to be unemployed. Um, Most of you right now during a pandemic, you're in a good spot because you're thinking about jobs and careers in the healthcare field or in the helping profession. Those kinds of jobs will always be needed. So you're in a good position. The more degrees you have, the more money you're likely to make, theoretically. Sort of depends on different situations. But you can see here that the unemployment rate will significantly go down with more of the college degrees you have. It doesn't mean that everybody should jump into grad school right away after college, but later on, it might be something to consider. All right, so let's talk about career development. So when you were a kid, you probably thought your careers when you grew up would be glamorous or exciting. Things like movie star or NBA basketball player, things like that. By the time you get to be a teenager, you're like, okay, so I'm really not tall, so I'm not going to be an NBA basketball player. But what am I still good at? That might be exciting. So it might be things like, well, I really thought that I wanted to be a doctor when I grew up because I loved watching Grey's Anatomy. So as a teenager, you might say, well, I'm not sure I really want to go to med school. I'm really thinking about being an OR scrub nurse because that looks pretty fun. Stage 3, okay, how can I make money and still be happy? So you start thinking about, okay, so what kind of careers might be available to me? Where do I have to go to school that I can afford going to college or go to a trade school in order to get the degree that's going to make me successful in my career? So sometimes that's what happens. Other times, there's people who take jobs such as working at the mall because they just need a job in order to make money. Stage 4 is when you're settled into your career. You tend to have more of a sense of community. You start to think about forward in your life. And then other people, unfortunately, might feel trapped in a dead-end job of just, it's a job, it's to make ends meet. I'm 5 years from retirement. I may as well just suck it up and keep going. Unfortunately, that happens. All right, so those of you who are graduating this year, you are considered a millennial. Those of you who are freshman, sophomore, junior, who are considered be Generation Z. For the sake of argument for this course, we're going to consider you all millennials at the moment because there's only a year or two differential, and these things tend to shift and change all the time. So millennials like to seek new jobs with similar interests. They're not going to be the people who stay at one job for 40 years. That's not going to be their experience. Millennials are going to keep seeking new and purposeful employment where they can really make a difference in the life of the world and the life of the community, etc. Sad to say, most millennials are actually not very engaged at work. About 55% of people say things like, yeah, I just turned on this podcast that I like listening to because this job I have is completely meaningless and boring. They're not happy. This is why we have such employee burnout, is because people in America, because we're a very individualistic country, we want to be happy at the job that we have. And so in order to do that, we feel like, we need to make our own needs get met in order to put up with the job that we really can't stand. So millennials, when they go out looking for work, they want something that's going to be very purposeful and make a difference in the world. We know that sexism happens at work. Women are likely to have more of a service career, so more things like nurses, teachers, caregivers, things like that. These kinds of jobs typically have lower pay and a lower status in the world than typically like doctors, lawyers, judges, etc. Women make less money, even though they might have an equal job title. For example, you could have a man and a woman both doctors. If the man is a heart surgeon, the woman is a family physician, those are two different pay grades. And so a family physician is someone who has doctor's office hours. So they may or may not be working weekends on a regular basis because they want to spend time with their own family at home. Whereas the heart surgeon, typically a man, might be more interested in working all those weekend hours, being called in at 2 o'clock in the morning, etc. Same thing with lawyer versus partner. So a partner typically in the law world will do more hours, etc. I'm sorry, the cat's drinking my tea. All right. We know that women just generally make less money for every dollar that a man makes. Your book says 78 cents, to every dollar. It changes every year, but it's typically in that same realm. All right, needs. This was a term I hadn't really heard until teaching from this book. So needs refer to people ages 16 to 29 who are neither employed nor in education or training, meaning they're not working, they're not in college or any kind of technical school. They're basically loafing on their parents' couch, essentially. You can see here number of needs. On this slide, I want you to specifically look at number of men versus women, and specifically about race. We see that more white people, and especially more women, tend to be a little bit more likely to be in need than anyone else. Sometimes that has to do with the fact there's a teenage pregnancy. Sometimes it has to do with resources available to white people versus Black people or brown people, etc. So it's all different, but that's who a need is. Okay, 5. You guys did some of this already with some testing and so forth. So these are the big 5 personality traits: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism. If you ever need to remember it, it spells out ocean. So the idea of openness is you have an appreciation for art. You're very open. You're people who, if someone asks you to color a picture, you color outside the lines, or you kind of make up your own picture. Very, very, very open. Conscientious people tend to have more of self-discipline. If you ask them to, hey, let's go on a road trip and be gone for 5 days, these people are going to be like, no, 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 that's not my thing. They want to have everything kind of laid out and planned out. Extroverts, I think you probably know what those people are. Extroverts tend to get more of their energy from being around other people, whereas introverts tend to be those people who want to just stay home and watch Netflix and chill out, and that's okay too. Extroverts during this pandemic are going crazy because they just don't have enough people in their life to connect with, to interact with, etc. Introverts in a pandemic, like, and the comfy sweatpants, this is great. I don't have to go anywhere. Agreeableness, these are people who just sort of get along with other people. They value it. They see the bigger picture of, aren't we all on the same team? Can't we just make decisions to get along and move things forward? They tend to be considerate and helpful. Like, neurotic people tend to be pretty anxious, pretty upset on a regular basis. They tend to be very negative. These are the big downers. They tend to have emotional instability, and they see something that's very small and blow it up into a big thing. So things like that. A little quiz. We'll see if you can guess all the right answers. Well, you're going to have to go into the PowerPoint and do it yourself. Generally speaking, you're someone who's open, you're someone who's agreeable, there's someone who's conscientious, there's your neurotic, there's your extrovert. Okay. Attachment. So attachment styles tend to fall into these 3 categories. Remember when we talked about toddlers and babies and how they were attached? We watched the Mary Ainsworth baby study where the mom left the room and the baby was on the floor crying, and we talked about attachment styles of a securely attached baby would feel excited and warm when the mom came back in the room. Remember that? Okay, I gave you a preview and said, hey, this is also a lot like romantic attachment styles later in life. So secure attachment is people who feel really easy to get along with other people. They make friends pretty easily. They don't feel abandoned, or they don't feel suffocated when someone tries to get too close to them. That's like the best attachment style out there. Avoidant is someone who's like, I know that we went on a date. I don't need to see you again for like 2-3 weeks. Like, it was nice, but I'm not going to really get involved with you. Or if they are involved, they might say things like, That's cool, but I'm going to go do my own thing tonight. I really don't want to be with you. Anxious and ambivalent, these are people who are reluctant to get as close as other people would like. So this can also look a little bit like a codependent relationship. So sometimes what happens with anxious and ambivalent is people who are like, I love you so much, I just can't live without you. Oh, you're going to the grocery store? I'm going to go with you. Oh, you're going to go get your hair cut? I'll just go sit and wait in the car and wait and be with you. It's not just like, sometimes it can be seen as like an abusive relationship where they're being controlled. A lot of times it's just the person is so anxious that they're not in the same space as their significant other. That upsets them. So they just need to be as close as possible. This is weird. This is the person who goes on your first date and starts talking about names of children that you want to pick out. That is not a healthy relationship. So we found that research on attachment, securely attached people, very low satisfaction in their relationship. High in attachment-related anxiety, daily conflicts. You do not want that kind of relationship. What do you mean you're going out to the store again? Weren't you just there 3 days ago? So that kind of situation. Young adults with more secure and positive relationships with their parents, like we talked about back in the last chapter, will easily make that transition to adulthood far smoother. So if you have a good, solid attachment with your parents as a teenager or young adult, when you enter into romantic relationships, you're going to be golden. You're going to have really good, solid, good relationships as an adult. Bottom line, are secure people more likely to end up with secure partners? Yes. Insecure people more likely to end up with insecure partners? Gotcha. So ideally, you want to make sure you're in a secure relationship with your parents, friends, and it goes back to Erickson's identity versus identity confusion, because Erickson said you have to have your identity figured out before you can enter intimacy. So this is the same concept. Attraction. That was a picture of my brother, by the way. He doesn't make any appearances in the slide, but that's my brother. Okay. Factors influencing attraction. So you tend to fall in love with other people who are a lot like you. They share similar values, similar beliefs. When you have someone who has the same values as your own, you validate each other. So that becomes very gratifying when you find someone who has the same stuff. Self-disclosure is when both partners will share weaknesses and vulnerabilities without fear of repercussion. It has to be reciprocated. It can't just be like a white knight in shining armor goes in to save the damsel in distress and she spills her guts to him and feels vulnerable and weak and all of that stuff. And then he's like, I'll take care of you. It has to go both ways. It has to be both directions. We also tend to be in relationships with people who live close by. If you're trying to do the long distance relationship, could it work? Absolutely. Typically, people who do the best long distance relationships have been people who have been in a relationship for a long time before they're separated by a long distance. So can it work? Yes. Does it take a lot more work? Mm-hmm. Is it likely to last? Not usually. It can depend. You never know. Okay. Let's talk about friendship. So men and women have different kinds of friendships. Men tend to be very solution focused in their relationships. Sometimes when men and women are in relationships and a woman comes home from work and just wants to vent about her day and just talk about her frustration, whether it be with her teachers or with her coworkers or with her boss, she just needs to vent. The man will often say, well, why don't you just do X, Y, Z and figure it out from there? And a woman said, stop trying to figure out my problems. I just want to talk about them. That's one of the differences, right? Men are with other men, they tend to focus on activities. So they like to go fishing, they like to go hunting, they like to go gambling, they like to go play basketball. They're all about doing things together, whereas women tend to want to talk about their emotions, they want to call a friend and vent, talk about frustrations. This is why we see so many wine nights that are happening, even in virtual times with the pandemic. Um, it, it's things like that. These are the differences. Can men and women be friends? Sure, absolutely. Friendships can change sometimes when someone's in a romantic relationship. It doesn't mean it can't come back. It doesn't mean that relationship that was once so great can't come back to something different once that romantic relationship has been established. So let's watch my favorite Friends episode of the season. I think I figured out how to do this, so let's hope this works. Okay, so there you saw the differences in communication styles between men and women. Hope you enjoyed the clip. I hope the sound worked. Okay. Sternberg's tragic theory of love said there's three different parts of relationships. There's intimacy, passion, and commitment. We basically said in order to have true love, you have to have all three of these components. Intimacy is the part of, you are sort of, let me start over. Passion is where it's complete love, complete sex, right? So passion is I want you now, right? That's sort of the use Phoebe's phrasing of I want to have sex with you, I want to make love to you all the time, right? So that's passion. Intimacy is more of the emotional sort of relationship building of I want to get to know you and I want to know your vulnerabilities and I want to love you anyway and I want to have unconditional love for you. And then commitment is more of the friendship story, more of the I'm in this together with you, I'm going to be your companion for life, I'm going to stick by your side kind of thing. And so when you have all of those together, that's when you have true love. And you can see around the triangle when different parts of those go together. It can be kinds of love, like if you have passion and intimacy, you have something called romantic love, which is fun and good and feels good. If you don't have that commitment, you're just kind of having a lot of sex and a lot of surface level relationship stuff. On the other side, if you have companion love, that means that you have committed to this person and that you understand and support them, understand all their emotional vulnerabilities. There's no sex. I think of this sometimes more as the old people kind of love, of older people who have settled into their married lives and maybe they're even in their 60s, who are people who are trying to just kind of get through life and they're going to be each other's companions until they die. There's no more passion in that relationship. So the key is to have all three of these things throughout your whole life and make it all very difficult to do and very easy to get away. All right, so why aren't people getting married? Why are people staying single well past their young adulthood lives? So some reasons: haven't met the right person, don't have financial stability, not ready to settle down, and too young to get married. So back in 1960, about 90% of people aged 25 married. 2012, only about half of people aged 25 were getting married. People said, hey, I've got other priorities. I want to go to college. I want to go to grad school. I want to start my career. I don't really have time to get married. Or you might say, college loans are expensive. So is a wedding. average wedding right now in Chicago, it's around the $32,000 mark. That's a lot of money, right? For some of you, that's a year's worth of college tuition. So some people have said, I got to pay off my student loans a little bit before I even think about figuring out a wedding. Also more acceptable for people to live together nowadays. So maybe they're living together and not really thinking about getting married because like, it's working for now and we'll get married eventually. About half of people believe society is just as well off if people have priorities other than marriage and children. So we've moved a society from marriage and children was the most important priority to, we can be just as good. That's not our priority. All right, moving along. Read some more information about marriage. So marriage is all about communication. Marriage killers are things like contempt, criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, things like that. Whenever you have two people in a relationship who are doing these things, this is not good. This is things that are going to kill the relationship. Things that strengthen a marriage are things of when you're respectful, when you have positive regard for each other, when you strengthen your friendship by engaging in activities that are similar. Improve your communication, conflict resolution patterns. So when you can have these kinds of things in place already, this is what's going to strengthen the marriage. Marriage deposits, this is sort of an interesting concept that your book brings up. It's a positive relationship characteristic to maintain good marriage during this conflict. So during this conflict, pandemic is what was on my mind when I said it. So marriage deposit is when you can actually do things for the other person that you know long-term they will remember in the long run. So for example, sometimes I go out and buy Kate's favorite candy bars or candy. She likes peanut M&Ms. I'll just leave them on her dashboard in her car with a little note that says, have a great day, take a break and have some M&Ms or something like that. Just little things like that can be what was known as a marriage deposit, sort of like a piggy bank. You just put in these little deposits, or like Kate's love language is cleanliness. And so I often try to make sure the house is clean and picked up when she gets home from work. So things like that can make a big difference going into a relationship, so that when you do have those fights and those arguments, that's something that you can look back on. I also make a cup of coffee every morning. So it's all the little things that add up so that when you do have a fight, you look back and say, oh, but wait, this person really does love me because of all these other things that have happened along the way. Here's some statistics on intimate partner abuse. You can read them there. They're pretty awful to look at. Victims have lots of different symptoms throughout their entire life if they're not dealt with the right way. Women who have intimate partner violence experience different patterns of violence than men who often just experience physical violence. Women tend to have all sorts of violence on them, as men tend to get more physical. If you're ever interested in something where you can volunteer and do some work in the medical field, Zacharias Center in Gurnee, Illinois, which is about 35 minutes from campus. They're a great program that helps victims of sexual assault. If you ever are interested in becoming a SANE nurse, which is sexual assault nurse examiner, these are the nurses who do the rape exams. You can actually go and volunteer at Zacharias Center and be a volunteer while the rape exam is done. So if you have more questions about it, let me know. They do a wonderful 40-hour volunteer training over the course of several weeks, and they're a really good organization. Okay, influences on parenting. So parent becomes a parent and develops their parenting style with lots of different things. So there's the parent's characteristics. For example, a parent was parented at one point by their own parent, right? So how your parents treated you is a history that you have of how you will raise your own kids. So it also comes from your personality. If you have one of those neurotic personalities and you're constantly worried or constantly angry, that kind of personality trait is going to influence how you parent your own children, along with all those other things. You know that typically teenage parents don't parent necessarily in a very healthy way because they themselves are teenagers trying to figure out what that means to be a teenager and a parent. So age can have an effect. Children's characteristics. Sometimes kids have lots of different things going on, and parents respond to those situations. I have a friend who has a 4-year-old right now with very strong symptoms right now of ADHD. That's a different kind of kid to parent than a kid who is developmentally on track with typical development neurologically. Um, Kids can also have other things. Maybe you have a kid who has lots of illnesses, right? They're on a ventilator, they're in a wheelchair. How you parent that kid is going to be different than how you parent a kid who's developmentally healthy. And then contextual and sociocultural characteristics. We parent within a network of things that are experiences. So our neighborhood, who we interact with socially, both online and in person. Well, my friend Mary Beth, her daughter's learning Chinese. I need to have my kid learn Chinese. Those sorts of things happen as well. All of those things affect how a person then becomes a parent. I used to be very angry with my mom because I didn't think she was a very good mom. And then I found out that both her parents were alcoholics. She was raised by people who were parenting her from an alcoholic point of view. That's a very different experience than how my mom raised me from a very, very sober point of view. So those kinds of characteristics can influence our parenting. And this is just, kind of going into the same concept, just rewritten in a different way. That is the end of chapter 7.